Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at introducing you to Adobe Photoshop. If you've never worked with Photoshop before, we're going to start from the beginning of setting up a document, understanding the different panels, navigation, as well as learning how to guide you through layer by layer and building in a simple template. We're going to start by going up to New File in the top left side navigation. The highlighted blue area, we can click on it and it'll bring up our menu where we can set up our document. Along the top navigation, we have a number of different presets we can choose from understanding photo sizes to getting into standard print documents, art and illustration, web, mobile, and film and video. Today we're going to start out with the standard letter size document at 8.5 by 11 at 300 ppi. Understanding that with our document, a standard letter size, we want to get into preparing the right side navigation to make sure it's in the proper settings. I'm going to rename this file Shapes, and taking a look at the width and height, we currently have it set up for inches, so it's 8.5 wide by 11 inches tall. We could always change the orientation. As we see, we have portrait mode or landscape mode to be able to switch the document tall or wide. We're going to keep it in portrait mode, and taking below, we have resolution. Resolution is referring to the amount of pixels per square inch. As we can see, it's listed over to the right side of the resolution itself. We can always switch it over to pixels per centimeter, but staying with common ways of measurement, we're going to maintain in that category. Below the resolution, we have the color mode. Currently, the default setting for our color mode is set to RGB. RGB is used during web-based files and preparation. Understand that RGB stands for red, green, and blue. If we wanted to switch over to a print quality type of image, we'd want to change it over to CMYK. We could always click on the drop down, click on CMYK to adjust. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. But we're going to maintain the RGB, get a little bit more vivid colors, and we can keep it on 8-bit. Below the color mode, we have our background contents. Currently, we're set up with a white background. We can always change this to transparent, but we'll stick with our white background just to understand how to unlock a layer and prepare a document for incorporating basic shapes and importing images. So once I have these settings, we can go down to Create, and this gives us the standard document or layout. Over to the left side navigation, we have the toolbar. If I want to understand what a tool is, I can simply move my cursor over top, and it gives me an indication of what this tool does. With the preview, we see the example of actually showing us highlighting over the first tool on the left side. We have the Move tools. With the Move tool, if I highlight over top, depending on the program that you're in, whether you're using a Mac or PC, you'll see a video to give you a sample of how the tool works. Also, within the instructions, also gives us the name of the tool as well as the shortcut key. The shortcut key identifies the fastest way to get to that tool, simply hitting the key on the keyboard. In this case, it's a V. But this will allow us to be able to simply get into moving an object as we start to build out our designs. Below this, we have the rectangular marquee tool. Rectangular marquee tool is this little dotted square. If I click and hold on the rectangular marquee tool, there's also tools listed underneath. Down the bottom right hand corner, you'll see a little arrow appear on each of these tools. This gives us an understanding that there are tools hidden underneath. It's the best way to keep everything organized, be able to understand what is happening, and how to be able to identify what your tool is. We're going to go through a couple basics in this video, and we'll go step by step to make sure you feel comfortable along the way. Over on the right side navigation, we have our color picker. The color picker is the large colored area that goes from white to a color, and then down the bottom right being a true black. In this area, we can select within any area of this colored hue. Hue is another name for color. But if I move my cursor up to the top right side, we can see that we get the most vibrant variation of red. If I want to adjust the hue, I can adjust on the hue bar. Clicking and dragging up this bar will allow me to change over to a different hue entirely. So I go into cyan or magenta, drop it down to blue, light blue, sky blue, many different colors. It's just a matter of choosing what you prefer. If I want to get a darker green, I can just simply adjust down to the area between the green on the top right and the black down the bottom right. Or if I want to get a tint, a lighter variation of a color, I can adjust over to the left towards the white area. So you have many choices to choose between, but for our basic introduction, we're going to keep to the primary colors. Three primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And understand that we can easily just adjust on the hue bar to find the color that you're looking for. Below our color picker, we're going to focus on particularly skipping over the properties panel. This is a lot of information for your first introduction, but we're going to go down to the bottom of the layers panel. The layers panel is significant because it helps us to identify what layer we're currently working on, what layer may be selected, and we currently have one layer listed, which is known as our background layer. To the right side of our background layer, we have a lock icon. This means that this layer cannot be edited. We can start to draw on it, but this means that we can't get to our background or seeing transparency of what's behind this actual white area. To change this, we're going to unlock this layer. I can click directly on this little lock, and it unlocks it. Now, if I want to take a look, you see that it does change the name from background to layer 0. I'm going to rename this back to background, just so we're clear in understanding what layer we're currently working with. And to the left side of this layer in the layers panel, you'll notice that this little sample is just a white box. This white box represents a visual thumbnail of what this layer has. Right now, currently, again, it's just white. But if I were to go over to this eye icon, known as visibility, this will allow me to hide my layer and reveal what is a transparent background. These little gray and white boxes help to make up our transparency, this little checkerboard pattern. And whenever you see this, understand it's important that this means that it is a transparent background. But this background is currently visible because we've hidden our background layer. If I were to reveal it again, we see that it's just filled in with white. But we can always hide or reveal that layer at any time, just clicking on the eye icon. Down on the bottom of the layers panel, it is significant in understanding what tools we have. All the way on the bottom right side, we have a little trash can icon. This is deleting out a layer. To the left, more importantly, we're going to look at adding layers. This little square with a plus sign represents that we can click on the button and it adds a new layer. Currently, you see layer 1. We're going to add 2 more layers. So we have layer 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to rename these to rectangle, circle, and triangle. Each one will get their own shape, and just a matter of clicking on the layer to be able to know which layer that we're going to be working on. If I choose on the rectangle layer, to build out a rectangle, we can go over to left side navigation, back to the rectangular marquee tool. Again, with the rectangle marquee tool, I want to move my cursor over to the main portion of the page. When I click, I can click and drag to create out a rectangular shape. You'll notice that as I drag left or right, there may be pink lines that appear to give us a sense of where the center of the document is. But we can drag this into any type of rectangle we want. We want to have a tall rectangle, a wide rectangle, just a matter of moving your cursor around so you're satisfied with the shape. If you are looking for a perfect square, we can always hold down Shift on our keyboard. If I click and drag Shift, or holding Shift, you get to see that it will maintain this perfect square. Just understand that if I want to make sure that this stays a perfect square, I have to let go with the mouse before I let go of Shift. If I let go of Shift, it can accidentally switch back over to our rectangle. But if I'm holding down Shift and then let go with the mouse, it will maintain this square shape right on our document. Understand that a toolbar will also appear underneath of whatever selection you've created. You can again highlight across, see modify selection, invert selection, giving you shortcut keys to be able to modify whatever shape or object that you're trying to affect. We can also deselect. Deselecting is getting rid of the dotted line. You can also use the shortcut key, which is Control-D to deselect. But for our rectangle layer, we're looking to fill this in right now. And if, again, I want to look to fill in this area, we're going to be taking a look at changing our color to, or changing our tool to our paint bucket tool. Over on the left side navigation, if you don't see the paint bucket tool, it is located in the same location as our gradient tool. About midway down the left side navigation, I can click and hold on the gradient tool and switch it over to the paint bucket. With the paint bucket being selected, you'll see a little icon representing that we are about to paint inside of our selected area. Currently my fill color is set up for yellow. I'm going to adjust this up to a blue just so it's a little bit more visible at the start. And I make sure that I have my rectangle layer selected. We don't want to accidentally paint on the circle or triangle, so we see that the highlighted gray area represents the rectangle. If I want to fill this in, all I have to do is move my cursor into that area with the paint bucket tool and click. And it automatically fills in that space. You can always look to deselect or click on deselect at the bottom if you want to get rid of the lines. But we can also go over to a new tool and just draw out a new shape as well. So if I do want to deselect, I can click on deselect here. And we see that the dotted lines, also known as ants marching, will disappear around the outside of the shape. We're going to now switch over to the circle tool. With the circle tool, again, the circle layer, we want to make sure that we change to the correct layer. And now we're going to look to select out the elliptical marquee tool. With the elliptical marquee tool, just as we were looking at with the oval, or with the square rectangle, if I click and drag, you can create out an elongated oval going vertical, or go wide with the shape. Or again, if I start to hold down Shift, it locks into a perfect circle. I'm going to maintain this perfect circle just for testing purposes. But again, remember to hold down Shift and let go with the mouse first, so it maintains that perfect circle shape. I'm going to switch this over to yellow. And you don't have to be precise, but if you do want to be precise, we can always switch over to our swatches panel. Our swatches panel shows a number of preset colors that we can choose from. But if you want a little bit more free reign, the color picker is very easy to manage and work with. Right now, again, we're just going to go over to yellow color. Go back over to our paint bucket tool. If you're ever wondering, the shortcut key is G. So if I were in the middle of my document and I hit G, it automatically jumps to my paint bucket. So when I go into this area, all I have to do is click once, and we see that fills in with yellow inside of that selection. Once we have these shapes, now we have our triangle layer to work with. I can switch over to the triangle layer, and we'll notice that there is no triangular marquee tool. Instead, what we're going to be taking a look at is our polygonal lasso tool. On the left side navigation, third tool left side, you should notice a lasso tool, kind of like a cowboy's lasso. We want to click and hold to select out our polygonal lasso tool. We'll take a look at the lasso tool a little bit later on. But with the polygonal lasso tool, it is a point-by-point building of a shape. So if I click on the polygonal lasso tool, I'm going to move my cursor down into the bottom portion of my document, click a point, and you'll notice that a line will extend from that first point we made. Once I'm satisfied with the area, I click again, move to a new area, and then I want to combine back to where I originally started. To make sure that you're closing up the object, we want to see that little circle appear next to your cursor. So if I were off the shape, you notice that we don't see that little circle, but if I move back towards that shape, we can enclose it. Understand that sometimes the polygonal lasso tool is a little bit tricky. If I accidentally click too far or start moving off the document, it's going to start adding in lines where I don't want them. If I start going all over the place, it can look chaotic. And some people get overwhelmed because we're seeing all these different lines that you didn't mean to click. If I want to be able to fix this, I can either hit backspace or delete. I'm working on a Mac, so I have the delete button. On a PC, you have both backspace and delete to choose from. But if I'm hitting delete, it's just undoing the last points that I made. And I can keep hitting this until I get back to the shape or lines that I want. So to close this back up, again, I'm going to move my cursor to the starting point, click, and we see the ants marching line or the dotted line appearing around the area that I've drawn. Again, we're going to finally fill this in. I'm going to pick out the third primary color, red, hit G on my keyboard, or I can go over to the paint bucket tool and simply click inside of the space. Now we have the three basic shapes on with the three primary colors. Those shapes can be used for building out shapes as well as getting into cutting out shapes. What I mean by this, if I deselect my object, we're going to take a look at seeing how we can modify, move, manipulate, and then finally get into editing out these shapes. If I go over to the left side navigation, clicking back on the move tool, this move tool again will show us a little black cursor with a navigational symbol underneath. This means that I can move objects around. If I want to move these objects around, I can move them anywhere on the page, but they will still maintain the order that I originally set them in. The square is still behind the circle, which is behind the triangle. If I want to rearrange the order of these objects, I can have to move them in my layers. To move them in my layers, you can see as they jump other shapes, they're changing the way they look because those objects are being restacked, reordered. You can also use shortcut keys to modify how these layers are organized. If I hit Command or Control, right bracket or left bracket, it will allow me to be able to move a layer up or down. Left bracket moves the objects down, right bracket moves the objects up. But you have to hold down Command or Control, Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, to adjust the location of those layers. So now that I've gotten into being able to manipulate the layers and the locations of those objects, we're going to get into now how to cut out or how to take out areas of an object. Over on the left side navigation, I'm going to go back to the rectangular marquee tool. With the rectangle layer selected, I'm going to look to just simply draw a box inside of my blue shape. When I draw in this area, you have two options. If I want to use the backspace or delete, I can hit backspace and you see that it cuts out this area, leaving transparency inside of this object. If I want to do this multiple times, I can look to cut out multiple areas. Test it out, see how it works for you. You can even switch to the elliptical marquee tool or the polygon lasso tool to create out different shapes, different cutouts. You can also look into cutting out a shape or pulling the shape away from the original object. With the area selected, using my elliptical marquee tool, I'm going to switch over to the move tool. Because I have the move tool selected, whatever area is selected in the move tool will cut out from the original shape. So you can see that I can move this shape, this circle, out of the square and now make it its own separate piece. But understand that this is still on the same layer. So if I get into moving this object later on, this whole object moves together. The same idea can be applied with any of these shapes. If I decided that I wanted to make this look like a Pac-Man, I could use my polygon lasso tool to draw out a shape or a piece of the pie to cut out from the circle shape. I could use the move tool, click and drag it away, or I can simply hit backspace and cut it out. The possibilities are endless, it's just a matter of you experimenting with it. Use the polygon lasso tool to cut out any type of design. Try to experiment and see what type of variations you can create. Even though I went into an open area, I'm not cutting out the entire piece of the triangle, but if I hit backspace or delete, you see that it cuts out. If ever I want to undo something, step back from what I did, I can always hit Command or Control Z. When I hit Command or Control Z, it undoes the last step I did, and I can hit that multiple times. Depending on the settings you made, you could step up to 25 times if you wanted. But just be clear that if you do step too far, you may not be able to undo everything that you did. But again, I could always use the Move tool to move this object, change the location of something, making it something different. I'm going to deselect again, Command or Control D. Now looking at our document, we've modified these shapes. We're going to look to see what other shapes we can create, just using the same basic tools. Over on the Layers panel, we're going to create out 2 new layers. This time with the layer 1, I'm going to rename this Zigzag. And layer 2, I'm going to rename to Freeform. We saw the chaos that came with the polygon and lasso tool. If I want to draw out a shape, I want to first select the zigzag layer. I'm going to click point by point to create a zigzag back and forth. But understand that I can go many different directions. And any time that I continue to draw lines, if it creates out a new shape, whether it's a little triangle, or if I'm getting into creating out some wonky shapes, anytime it encloses in an area, it's going to create a new shape. So you could end up with a trapezoid, a long rectangle, or another triangle. You can create out different cutouts to make it whatever you want. But sometimes it can get overwhelming again. Just be careful where you're clicking and know what you're trying to draw out. If I go in the zigzag layers, again, I'm going to go to the paint bucket. This time I'm going to pick out secondary colors. The secondary colors are green, purple, or orange. So it's your choice of what you want to fill in. But I'm going to choose out a green color for right now. And all I have to do is click inside the area with the zigzag layer selected. And it fills in all those little areas that make up the shape. I can always deselect. And we see that we have these shapes to work with. But it's, again, all one layer. So if I start to move it around, it's moving every piece that makes up this shape. On the top layer, the freeform layer, we're going to go over to the original lasso tool. The third tool, left side navigation, click and hold where the polygon lasso tool is. And I'm going to click and drag to create out more of a wonky abstract shape. I can wave back and forth, but be as creative as you want. If you want to try something different, understand that with the lasso tool, it is all following how your arm or your hand moves the mouse. You can create out many different shapes or whatever type of design you want, but I'm going to fill this in with a new color. Pick out a purple color and simply click inside the area. We get this abstracted shape in front of us. Again, you can always use a combination of tools. If I decide that I wanted to put in a couple circles, I can draw in an area, and I could always move an object using the Move tool, or you can actually draw out multiple objects. So if I decided that I wanted to do a couple cutouts on every part or limb of this abstract shape, I can actually hold down Shift on my keyboard to draw out more shapes. And you see that it leaves the selections visible so that they're all going to be done at the same time. So this gives you a little bit more control to be able to edit as you go along, being able to adjust. If again I want to undo, I can always hit Control Z. And you see that it makes that last selection I created disappear. So I can redraw it out, and again I can look to draw out another area for cutout. If I wanted to use the Move tool, I can simply click and drag them away, or I can always just simply again hit backspace to eliminate them out. So we have a number of different shapes that we've kind of created, and we can get into modifying these or making them a little bit more unique. But before we do that, we're going to take a look at our original background. I'm going to deselect, Control D to get rid of any selected area, and we're going to choose on our background layer, which if I do have the background layer, it's currently filled in with white. Or if you do have a transparent background, that's absolutely fine. But we're going to see how we can also create out a transparency. So before we get into using a gradient, before getting into the gradient, I'm going to hide my other layers so they don't become a distraction. So along the left side of each layer, I can simply click on the visibility, or I can click and drag on those eyes to make them all disappear at once. It's very easy to simply click and drag to make them reveal, or again, just hide them out, click and drag down those eyes. With our background, we're going to take a look at our gradient tool. In the same location as our paint bucket, back to the original gradient tool, we see this little square that transitions from black to white. With this, my current foreground color is this purple color, and then I have white in the background. But if I'm looking at my gradient on the top left side, I see that it is currently set up for black to gray to black again. If I want to change this color system, I can click on the drop down arrow next to this area and get into choosing out a different gradient, whether they're presets provided for us or using the foreground and background that is currently set up. So if I click on the foreground and background, you see that we see the white on the left, purple on the right. And if we do want to change this, I can always click on the foreground color, bring up another color picker, and we can adjust to a different color. I can also click on the white box, our background, and choose out a different color here. So once I have these, currently it's set up for a standard blue to green gradient. With the standard gradient tool, I can click and drag, and we create out a blue to green gradient. This is set up for a radial design. If I want to modify this in any way, I can always switch my gradient to a linear gradient, which just travels from one direction to the next. And I can go left to right, right to left, top to bottom, or bottom to top. But there are also other variations as well. We have the angle gradient, which if I click and drag, you see it kind of wraps around in a circle and then goes from the blue to green. Or we have the mirror gradient, clicking and dragging, we see how the blue is extended in the middle while surrounded by the green. Or we have the diamond gradient, which I can extend out to any different various area. But you can have fun with these gradients, kind of test it. Or if I want to get into modifying a gradient, I can click directly on this sample on the top left side. I can take a look at other options and presets that are given to me and look to create a different type of gradient. You see that it will switch, depending on if you're a Mac PC, it will switch in front of you, or it can switch based on drawing it out again. But again, we can click and drag to create out these gradients. Just a matter of experimentation and seeing what you can create. This is part 1 of the introduction to Photoshop and the basic tools. If I were to hide these layers again, we can reveal a lot more interesting graphic. I'll be back with you shortly.